American Student Assistance is a national nonprofit helping millions of teens learn more about themselves and their options for the future. We're innovating, collaborating, and advocating so that we can give middle and high school students the confidence to pursue their own paths, the tools to explore, experiment, and connect on their terms, and the means to make informed decisions about their post-secondary education and career goals. Because there isn't just one route to helping students find success, there's a whole universe of possibilities out there. Join us in exploring how we're challenging the status quo and engaging young people in new and innovative ways.
Hello, I'm Judy Goldstein, Senior Vice President of PR, Communications and Planning for American Student Assistance. We know you had many choices of sessions to attend today, and we're so happy that you're going to spend the next 30 minutes with us. We're going to share insights today on what you need to know about today's teens. Super helpful if you're sitting in a chair that either develops solutions for middle grades and high school students, or if you're an educator trying to engage those students in your classroom. We'll also take a look at teen views on gaming, self-directed content, and how challenges are not only building engagement, but providing teens with the agency they desire. We have three panelists today with different points of view. One focuses on experiences and innovation strategy and is an expert on designing solutions for Gen Z. Another is a former educator who creates engaging career solution experiences for the classroom. And the third heads up innovation at ASA and has her finger on the pulse of what's working and what's not. So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. Let's start with Priya. Priya, thanks so much for being with us today. Can you introduce yourself to the audience and share insights on how Gen Z approaches learning and how solution providers in particular should be thinking about designing for Gen Z?
Absolutely. Hi, Judy, and thank you so much. It's really great to be here. I am Priya Vyas, as Judy mentioned. I work in experience and innovation strategy and design. Spent a fair amount of time conceptualizing and building products for Gen Z. My current role is I am the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at DeVita Verde in New York City. So some of what I'm going to talk about is relevant, maybe very specifically relevant to the work that you might be doing. But I'm also going to talk in terms of principles and principles that are impacting the experiences that we create for Gen Z. So first and foremost, I'd like to say that Gen Z sees themselves more as apprentices than they do as traditional students. So they feel quite unconstrained by the notions of traditional classroom learning before experience. They believe in their innate competence and ability to problem solve and innovate. So they rely on their resourcefulness to learn as they need to. A term we've come to refer to as informal learning. So educating Gen Z is about facilitating resourcefulness and the ability to indulge curiosity sparks in a way that's digestible and in formats that they are very accustomed to consuming. Secondly, Gen Z is very aware of bias. They're aware of bias in information and how it may impact the quality of the information they are receiving and how it may impact their ability to interact with and or be treated fairly within a given product, experience, or service. So this is something we always bear in mind, and we try to remain really proactive and transparent while designing for this generation in particular. It's a highly principled generation. They question sources and their underlying motivations constantly. As a result, real engagement with Gen Z requires, being real. It must be received as authentic and reflections of their own voice. They're not just the TikTok generation. Their concerns really transcend that. And this generation should be given more credit for looking to solve the true challenges of the future and to help them point their technologically empowered agency in that direction. Good old-fashioned career planning and career discussions don't really resonate with kids today. Presentations like you can be a doctor and this is how, or a lawyer or a sports agent, you know, if you're lucky, depending on the range of dialogue that you get, is often met with, I don't really want to be any of those things. So these kids are still forming what they like, let alone what they want to do with the rest of their lives. Another interesting and potentially incredibly relevant factor is that kids today feel like their hobbies are very separate and differ vastly from what they see as potential career options. But interestingly, their hobbies and interests may be preparing them more than they even realize to be real contributors to the future of work, and to help them devise really fulfilling post-secondary lives. Gen Z is not afraid to hustle and be seen doing it. They bring their connectivity and modern tool sets to the world. And they do this within new and often unimagined behaviors. So connecting sparks of interest, curiosity, and the inherent sense of agency to a broader context is important to inspire designing experiences for Gen Z that will create longitudinal impact. And lastly, Gen Z has tremendous activated voice and opinions, and they use all types of media and forms of expression to let that voice be known. They use digital media to surface their voice and convene around the issues they care about. Even though most of them are not of voting age, they look to continually advance their agency and their impact and create ways to let their voice be heard.
You know, Priya, it's super interesting. I picked up on something you said about Gen Z perhaps not responding to, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. Can you just touch base and let us know what type of content is resonating with them if the traditional way of presenting careers, for an example, isn't? What are some tips and things we should be thinking about when we're
leaning into natural behaviors is a really great way to meet Gen Z today, particularly online, because their digital lives are extensions of themselves and these behaviors are so robust. So it's not just about content. I mean, a large part of content for Gen Z is the communities surrounding the content. So gaming isn't just about playing video games, it's watching streamers play games, it's hanging out with your friends and gaming discords, and watching YouTubers, etc. And that manifests itself in all forms of content. So for example, if you're a fan of a sports league, you're hanging out on a subreddit, and you're commenting and contributing. If you like a band, sort of same kind of activity. So, you know, it's worth pointing out that in these communities, that's where Gen Z actually believes the truest sources of their information come from. So you're far more likely to trust what you heard from a random person on a subreddit than you are, or a Discord, than you are on a news website or something that comes up on a Google search. So that's something to keep in mind as you're designing experiences that are really intended to be trustworthy and intersect kids in their natural digital lives.
Awesome, super helpful. You mentioned something about gaming, and Elisa Wilkie is with us. She heads up innovation at ASA. Elisa, can you please introduce yourself? And I'm curious, I know that we've spent a lot of time at ASA talking about gaming, gamification, and edutainment. So after you introduce yourself, perhaps you could tell us what the difference is between those two?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Wilkie, and I am in charge of innovation at ASA. And I've spent quite a number of years building educational technology products, everything from K-12 to college students and adults. And gamification has been used for years. And I think building off of what Priya said, you know, gaming is a key part of the way Gen Z engages today. It's more than that console we might have done, you know, 30 years ago on our Atari. It is part of their lives. And so, you know, there's no denying the power of that gaming industry. You know, it's estimated to be $160 billion this year alone. And kids are engaging in games in a big way and a lot. And so I think that when we talk about we like to toss around, particularly on the build side of pedagogy and course materials for students, let's gamify it. It's gamification, or it's edutainment. Adults get really excited calling something gamified. Sadly, we're not necessarily impressing the kids when we call it that. But I think gamification, edutainment, they're used a lot. They are blurry terms, there's no hard and fast rule, but generally gamification means applying game mechanics to an entire system of learning. So an entire biology course or something like that, right? So you're using things like badges and points and leaderboards and levels and quests, pick your own path. And those were traditionally considered very, consistent things that are used in game environments. In more recent years, there's been peer-to-peer live interaction between students, which is great to see. These things do a great job of moving kids through a level or through a process and getting them to complete things and complete tasks. Edutainment is generally considered something that's designed for fun first, but then teaches you something. And they're typically not applied to an entire system of learning or an entire textbook or an entire, skills aligned, or standards aligned. And they're good for things like teaching, in the adult world, teaching certain job skills, right? So you join a new company and you have to learn certain skills. Edutainment's often used. There's also a lot of great small apps like quizzes that I see teachers using as supplements in addition to courseware. So in terms of the definitions, that's where we are.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing is that they're not necessarily creating amazing user experiences for kids. And I think that's where we need to decide overall, what are we using these techniques for?
It's so interesting because you said something about, and I mentioned about, parents being hip, but our perceptions versus the kids' perceptions are very different. What are their expectations, teens, what are their expectations for their online learning experiences?
Well, I mean, if we're thinking about games, and again, building off of what Priya was saying, there are a lot of things that Gen Z is engaged in online and their expectations for life in general. But in the gaming world, these are really high-end consumer products with amazing user experiences, right? Big budget games. These kids are spending on average 5 to 8 hours a week on games. And whether that's on their mobile device, on a PC, interconnected, or in a console environment. And these kids are connected with friends, and the graphics are unbelievable to the point where they look like big budget motion pictures, right? So I think that
so if they get in the classroom and it's not that,
exactly,
we haven't met their expectations.
1,000%. So I think what happens is us developers of courseware or classroom materials sit around and say, we're going to gamify it, we're going to put anime on it, or we're going to give them a badge and a trophy. The kids are seeing through that. I call this putting chocolate on the broccoli. There's no fooling them. So I think we need to think strategically about how we use those components. And I think what's really starting to happen is that smart players in our space are thinking about how to utilize the commercial games. So don't try to build those commercial games. If you're teaching to standards, teach to standards, but utilize those commercial games in some fashion.
So that we'll get to Ashley in a second, who has some insights into more of for educators. But just one quick question, Elisa, is there maybe a best practice for leveraging games in the classroom?
Well, I mean, Minecraft comes to mind. I think that a lot of times educators and parents get really concerned about online game time, right? You know, the negative note, it's too much time playing games, or they're all first person shooter games and they're violent. There's lots of different kinds of games. There's adventure games, there's open games, which is what a Minecraft is. It really lets the user design their experience. There's puzzle games. There's all kinds of things. And I think that games teach 21st century skills, whether you want to believe it or not. Even those first person shooter games teach communication when they're networked on a headset. They teach collaboration, time management, problem solving, all kinds of skills that a lot of us that talk about SEL all day, they're thinking they're having fun, which they are, because that's why kids play games, is that they're doing it for entertainment, relaxation, stress management, and fun. And in the meantime, they're learning skills. So finding that intersection, and Minecraft has done it, others have done it. There are other great games. I think teachers and educators could try to learn what these games are and make that part of that class. It's a supplement, right? It doesn't teach biology, but it's a supplement, and embrace those commercial games where these kids are spending all of their time.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about insights for educators. Ashley Hemme is a former teacher and develops engaging career-based programs for ASA. Ashley, we know kids want their own agency. We know they want choices and activities that are meaningful to them and relevant to them. Can you talk about some of the educator-based platforms that you've seen in practice that are available for educators today?
Yeah, absolutely. So lessons, activities, and platforms that leverage student interest and choice can create experiences that are engaging and meaningful for kids. Priya mentioned some really interesting findings earlier, that Gen Z's interests and hobbies can be important contributors to their future of the world of work, and that Gen Z's continue looking for ways to amplify their voices in areas they care about. This kind of research about Gen Z's attitudes and preferences, as well as how they choose to spend their time at home, provides some really important insights that educators can use in their own instruction. Many educators are using these insights to gamify their own lessons by replicating digital escape rooms or using elements from popular video games like Fortnite. Or they're seeking out gamification resources, especially digital-based games for the classroom. Now, while this sounds amazing to do, it takes a lot of time and planning, especially when you're building resources from scratch. And so that's where these platforms come in. And so I really want to highlight one as a model for this kind of work, and that's ASA Solve Together. So ASA Solve Together is a national contest where middle school classrooms solve real-world problems on a digital platform. And what it does is it leverages student agency by encouraging kids to explore issues they care about, and by providing lots and lots of opportunities for student choice. During this contest, which took place this past spring, and we're going to have a second round again this fall, educators sign up student teams who will then be able to select between 4 challenges. 2 are based on the COVID-19 pandemic, another on climate change, and a 4th on building a colony on Mars. And so part of the challenge is that the teams then had to solve the problems through the lens of a career. And there were many to choose from. Some teams were architects, some were doctors, some were sports executives, and there were many other choices. This not only helps teams focus their project, it tasks them with ways to explore and research the wider problem and how they can play a role in that solution. And once the teams worked through what their solution would be, they had to create a deliverable to showcase their work. And this was yet another opportunity to make decisions about their projects. So deliverable choices included creating a presentation, a video, a podcast, an infographic, and there was a choose your own option for teams to get really creative. There was a competition element of the contest that kept students motivated because ultimately they were playing for funding for their school as well as for student prize money. And because this contest was team-based and provided a multi-layered digital experience, students were able to practice many of the 21st century skills that Elisa mentioned. For the contest, we specifically highlight what we call the 4 C's, and they're critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity. And this was a crucial component of the contest, especially in a school year where many schools were toggling between virtual, in-person, and hybrid instructional models, and students were really hungry for some interaction. When kids are able to practice 21st century skills like the 4 C's in various different capacities, both at home and throughout the school day, They learn how to approach different situations and are better prepared for the future.
Ashley, I'm curious, what are some of the gamification elements that educators are using in their own instruction?
Yeah, so I explained these different components of ASA Solve together because the platform and a range of other digital platforms out there show us some key elements that educators are using in their classrooms. These components include providing the opportunity for students to be decision makers in their own learning, providing lots and lots of choices, building in competition elements, and utilizing the 4 Cs. But ultimately, what is perhaps the most powerful is centering resources on topics that students truly care about. This could be choosing real world problems for kids to tackle so they learn about how they can create positive change in the world. And this is something that ASA Solve Together does. Or it could be embedding many of the games that Lisa mentioned earlier, or allowing kids to explore and research an array of topics that they're interested in. These different components can be found in so many various resources, or educators can replicate it themselves in their own lessons. And gone are the days where gamification is just restricted to STEM classrooms. All content areas, especially English and social studies, can do it too. During the ASA Solve Together contest, we had educators who teach all core content areas participate, and even some other electives like theater and leadership join them. In order to begin building in gamification elements in any classroom setting, focus on what standards and content-based skills need to be taught, and build your content around student interests. Then think about how you can include choice to give students some ownership of their learning.
Wow, fantastic. And Priya, I'd like to take a bit of a detour here and talk a little bit more about digital content and what's resonating with Gen Z. As you know, last year, ASA launched Futurescape, which is a free mobile experience that gave 2.3 million students the opportunity to explore careers. Before that, ASA launched Future Network, a very different experience, but one based on original video programming that helped 7.2 million kids explore education and career opportunities. Why is this type of self-directed content so popular with Gen Z?
Well, first thing to note about both Futurescape and Future Network is that they were conceptualized with Gen Z at the absolute center, which is where I think building compelling experiences, whether they're games or content, has to start. And you know, we see the benefits of that in the numbers and the uptake of the time spent with both of these products. The other thing is that they were intended to meet kids where they are, insert themselves in their really involved digital lives. And again, a really compelling intersection point in what we've come to call informal learning. So Futurescape, there's a few things that I can point to that I think really stand out in terms of its delivery. One, it had a really personalized onboarding. So the content that you received is unique to you and really digs into the things that you might be curious about, but also things that you might not even know that you have a curiosity, that you could have a curiosity about. So that's one very compelling aspect of its delivery. The user experience is incredibly modern. And you know, it's become a cost of entry, particularly when you're competing with everything online. It's full of information, and the information is varied in its format, how you consume it, where you receive it. So that is another very compelling piece of it. And lastly, you can really absorb all of it at your own pace. You can move forward, backwards, sideways, save things, and that's helps keep bringing kids back to the experience. So that I think has really created a lot of interest and activity around Futurescape. Future Network, which was launched prior to Futurescape, again, emanates from what Gen Z cares about, and it's topics that they care about, and it's topics that they care about brought to them by the types of people that they can relate to, with videos that enter their lives and content that is consumable in formats that they enjoy consuming. So again, you can see that all of those factors pulled together in a complete experience really resonate, and the number of people who have interacted with the video content, as well as the completion rates for the content itself.
That's amazing. So basically, it's taken all the principles that you've talked about today and wrapped it up into a solution that kids are actually thinking we got it right. Question, one parting thought, if you will. Can each of you share one recommendation that you would have for our ISTE audience today? Elisa, let's start with you, then we'll move to Ashley, and then we'll end with Priya.
Sure. I think if you're in the audience and you're building programming that is designed for classrooms to teach to standards, and you need students to get through a set pedagogy, then I would say really try to focus on a simple, clean user experience that's easy to understand, that gets students to the next level, and not try to over-engineer a lot of slick graphics, because I feel like that falls short. The kids see through it. It needs to be clean and it needs to achieve those goals. I think if you're a teacher and you're looking for supplemental ways to engage students, as Priya would say, in their native environment, then spend a little bit of time and learn those tools that they're using. There are great supplemental apps, like I said, quizzes that are out there that I see teachers use and use effectively, and learn some of these games. Maybe talk to your students about what video games they play and check them out, because those games are teaching skills on the back end, and figure out a way. Maybe ask them what their role is in Overwatch. That will be very insightful into figuring out those kids' core competencies. We should be embracing these games because they spend a lot of time there.
Wonderful. Ashley?
Yeah, so when we talk about how to gamify lessons in the classroom, the biggest obstacle I always hear is time. The student need for innovative lessons and agency in their work is clear, but how do we create those experiences, and how do we find the time to be able to do that in our work? And my recommendation for that is to start small. Take one lesson or activity and build in some of these components of gamification, then try it out with your students and try out one digital resource, whether it be a platform like ASA Solve Together or a game. See what works and learn the process of building in student choice in your instruction. If there are others in your building also interested, collaborate and share resources. And this is a big instructional shift, and it's a different way of thinking, but the increase of student engagement and achievement is really amazing to witness. And while gamification is fun for students, it's also really fun to teach and facilitate.
Wonderful. And Priya, final thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, well, I always think that everything has to be built audience first. And that is the most critical way to do anything, the most critical vantage point to make anything a success. So it starts at really identifying and trying to connect the vectors that your audience cares about. In the case of Gen Z, it really is things like friendship, inspiration, agency, expression, change, discovery, activism. So seamlessly being able to bring those into your world really creates an incredibly compelling and sticky experience.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to the three of you for sharing your insights today. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you have questions for us, you can either come to the booth, or we'll have in the chat some information about how you can reach us after ISTE. And if you do join us at our booth, you can enter to win the ISTE raffle and a chance for $350 for you or for your school. Thank you again, and have a good day.